See, I sometimes think that we know where Atlantis is, and that for some reason we're holding back on telling people. I don't know why. Why do I feel that way?
Because it's true. So I actually spoke at an international conference in Indonesia last year. And there were lots of researchers that are talking about physical evidence of Atlantis having been in Asia. Not necessarily with the Atlantic Ocean. But what I've also realized is that in ancient texts, they'll often say, it's over here when it's over there. So then they can tell the whole story and not have people go and find out. So there's this thing about mundane people. If Atlantis had all these riches and specialty woods and aromatherapy and all these crops and that sort of thing and gold and jewels, they didn't want people to go and find it.
Exactly.
And so they'd say it's over there. The other thing that's been really misleading is the whole of the ocean was the Atlantic. And it was the world
those days,
ocean.
it was everything.
It was everything. And so there's all this thing about opposites so that we don't exactly know. And so we've all gotten confused about it. But as well, Atlantis was a worldwide seafaring culture. And so they colonized. And so there were little pockets all over. So in terms of what Plato said about Atlantis being 32 points, and all the places that have been designated to possibly be Atlantis, Antarctica, Crete, goes on and on, Santorini, the high Altiplano in South America, all these different things have check marks of what Plato said. So a lot of people say, well, Santorini didn't have elephants, so they made it up.
Right.
So where are all these points? And there is one place where all these points...
And where might that be? That's what we're revealing today on Beyond Belief.
The Sunda Strait. Sundaland, which is actually where the landmass broke up.
How big was
North?
this?
Huge. Okay, but every time... And it's my information now from my research is that there were 4 disasters, not one.
And so, like after the other? Boom, boom, boom?
No. Well, the one that most everybody's talking about is 11,600 and some 60 years.
Right, that was the period, right?
Well, and that was the last major flood.
Yes.
So before that, 18,500 years ago, and Dr. Paul Laviolette confirms the idea of a solar flare happening at the same time. So when I'm talking about things, I'm looking to triangulate, cross-reference, not just get it from one place. So there's other evidence at 58,000 years and 85,000 years.
They just kept getting blasted.
They kept getting blasted. And right there at in the Sunda Strait is where 3 tectonic plates meet, and there's 3 volcanoes. And so it just kept breaking apart and perhaps getting smaller, but it stayed there until the very end. But when it was thriving and it was on the equator, everything else was in an ice age. Right. And so it's just really interesting how we wouldn't have understood how it went. But, worldwide seafaring culture. But my understanding is the first disaster flipped the poles. Okay. And so the magnetic poles.
And that would have occurred?
I'm thinking that one was the 58,000 years.
Okay.
And then part of my research has to do with chasing after my past lives. So I had a past life reading that said that I was on an evacuation committee.
I was there too.
When there was advanced knowledge that there was going to be a catastrophe and what were we going to do to help the people, right? Or to help the planet.
Yeah.
That's when I think, now I'm coming really strongly on this, that the pyramids started to be built in various places. But often a pyramid, if you go through the top of the pyramid, through the center of the earth, you'll come out the other end at a volcano. So there was something about this torquing.
It's like that movie Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah. And the weight of the pyramids, the location of them on ley lines, this sort of thing was designed to stabilize the planet. So that wouldn't happen. So if we're talking Grand Central Atlantis, let's say, in Sundaland, then they would send out various groups. So I like to think of it, now we have various groups here. Think about hip-hop kids, and they have their own style, they have their own music, they have their own preferences. You think firemen and ballerinas, and so it's like the Mayans were one group, and the Chinese were another group, and the Vedic Indians, and they all went to colonize. So when we look at where what they look like. They had different styles, feathers in their hair, different music, that sort of thing. But I think that they could have been what I'm calling the third party hypothesis, where they all came from a similar source, but then they each had their own
branched out.
And then
right?
they each had their own style. So we end up thinking that they're all separate, but they all had civilizing culture, commerce, astronomy, geometry, all these sacred geometry, all this knowledge. They all had, actually, if you look at it, they all had similar knowledge, similar symbols.
How advanced were they?
Extremely, much more than I think that we even understand, that we can even guess. And so lately there's been some information about Antarctica. And what they're finding there, I think they're doing steam excavation in Antarctica, and they're finding, now again, I don't have verification on this, but extremely sophisticated labs and animals in stasis that are not what we knew, but really sophisticated technology. So I think it was a very, very incredible, peaceful time.
Were the Atlanteans the ones that in the Bible God created the flood to destroy them because of whatever they were doing at the time?
Well, good point. But the thing is if corruption is causal to flooding, I think we're well overdue to be completely
And we're going to get
underwater.
flooded again. That's right. Be ready.
Because there's plenty of corruption. So I think this is, again, one of the misnomers that make us think that they were corrupt and they were fighting and they started a war in Athens and all that. But that's kind of like when you and I have talked often about the Egyptians. And the warring stuff happened later, 19th, 20th dynasty. And the pre-dynastic times were very peaceful and civilized. So dynastic Egypt started in 3113 BC, and that's when it started to become more patriarchal. So I think that in Atlantis, because there's so many years of it, many processional cycles, there was time for it to be golden, and then in the Iron Age several times. So this was an ongoing culture.
I've always believed, Carmen, that these catastrophes, these earth catastrophes that have occurred, were misconstrued by the people of the day in the era, and then they always said, it's God that did this to us, when they were probably real natural events that occurred, and as you say, 4 major ones. In the last one, of course, just wiped them out. That was it.
Yes, and that's why we get tricked, because Santorini, for example, is one of the major candidates for possibly having been Atlantis.
Yes.
But if it was destroyed and it disappeared, Santorini's still there.
It's still there.
But
What
we
happened?
can hear these things and they repeat it over and over again, and we go, okay, Santorini could be it. But no, it would be gone. So there's all these tricks that if things keep getting repeated, we end up giving up and not really understanding how to look for it. But there's a lot of evidence now about Java and that whole area, and lots of researchers.
That's fascinating.
It is. And I think that part of this thing about Atlantis, Atlantic, Straits of Gibraltar, all of that, is it would make Atlantis Western. And this fits in, and you and I have discussed this before about King Tut. There was a big thing about King Tut was Akhenaten was his father, because that would have made King Tut white.
Right.
And I think that DNA
He was
testing,
not.
no.
Yeah.
And so, but that's the thing. We want to keep the history kind of making us look like we're the dominant ones, and it may not be that.
The technology of the Atlanteans at the time, did they have flying machines?
Well, that's kind of hard to verify. There seems to be plenty of stories in the Vedic texts that describe that, and I don't see why not. I mean, they were highly
I mean,
sophisticated.
they may have been way advanced.
Yeah. But they had everything. It was paradise, really. Aromatherapy and natural woods and, very special things and a very sophisticated lifestyle. They didn't have money. Government didn't work like ours does.
Right.
And it left people at peace to
Sounds
be
like they
creative.
did it right.
Yeah, and I think that that's what's important to me about studying it, is what of those values can we bring back? Because really in this world, we're in a crisis of values.
Oh,